Welcome to Amot, where we speak with LGBTQ Armenians in Los Angeles and hear their journeys of identity, resilience, culture, and community. I'm Lara Vanian Green. In partnership with the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, this series explores mental health, belonging, and the traditions that shape us. Honest conversations, practical support, and real people finding their way. You are not alone. Let's start the conversation. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Amot. Today, we are going to have a panel discussion about the explosive events that took place in the summer of 2023 at school boards across California. And in this instance, we are specifically going to be talking about what happened at GUSD and the school board meetings in our part of the world. We have with us today Talene Arsenian, the president of the Glendale Teachers Association. We have Vic Gerami, an esteemed reporter, activist, and filmmaker. Shant Jaltarosian, who is a member of the Gallus board at the time of these events and is a community advocate. And Hasmik Manasian, a high school teacher in Berkeley, California. Thank you all so much for joining us today in this really important discussion. And it might seem like, why are we discussing something that happened almost 3 years ago now? But it left such a huge impact. And I know for me personally, it was something that was very difficult to recover from, with a minimum of 2 parts of my identities fighting one another on opposite sides of the protests that sometimes turned violent and definitely were spurred on by outside forces. I'm going to allow our guests to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit more about who they are, and then we'll get into what happened in the summer of 23. Talene, do you want to start?
Absolutely, Lara. Thank you so much for having me participate in this podcast. I'm happy to be here and share my perspective as the union president. My name is Talene Arsenian. As you shared, I'm a 27-year math teacher in the Glendale Unified School District. I've been the full-time release president for 9 years, and I'm also the single mom of 2 daughters, 2 GUSD alumni who went to Glendale Public Schools, elementary, middle, and high school. And they are now 2 adults that I am very proud of. I'm super proud of my daughters. And I am also a public school advocate. I never dreamed that as a public school teacher, I would have to advocate for my profession, for our students, and for the curriculum that we teach. I have also been a representative, a delegate at the state level, at the California Teachers Association, State Council, that's their representative. And I have also represented the approximately 1,250 educators of Glendale in the national level at the National Education Association Representative Assembly, which happens yearly, and I've been a delegate there for the last 14 years. So I'm very proud to represent the educators of Glendale, both at the local state, and also at the national level.
Thank you. Vic?
Oh, sure. Lara, thank you for having me on the panel with all the other esteemed guests. I'm a journalist by trade. I have an online publication, The Blunt Post. For 5 years, I had a radio show of the same name, The Blunt Post with Vic on KPFK 90.7 FM. I'm also an activist, LGBTQ activist, as well as for Armenians and just human rights in general. I'm a delegate for the state of California Democratic Party, Assembly District 44, and I make documentary films. I made 2 about the Artsakh genocide. And yeah, in the last 6 years, I've devoted my life, my career to the Armenian cause because of, we all know what's been happening and what, this has been one of the most tragic and eventful periods of our history. So last 6 years, I've basically done nothing but be in the middle of this. And, obviously, I was just as a gay Armenian American, I was very disconcerted with what happened with LA Unified, Glendale Unified, and just appalled. Actually, disconcerted is not an accurate word for that. So I'm happy to be here and just speak my perspective.
Thank you. Hasbi?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is Hasmi Minasyan. I am an Armenian American. My family emigrated to the United States in 1978 from Beirut, Lebanon. I grew up in Southern California. I'm an out lesbian teacher of Armenian descent in Berkeley, California. I teach ethnic studies. I've been teaching at Berkeley High School for about 25 years, and I teach history and ethnic studies and a class called social living, which is sort of the health education, sex education. I feel really honored to be on this podcast, sort of from outside of the region. I did grow up in Southern California, but moved to the Bay Area. I have a lot of sort of thoughts and ideas about the ways in which the intersection of Armenianness and you shouldn't have to give up your Armenianness at the gay door, and you shouldn't have to give up your gayness at the Armenian door. And I think our community it's come a long way, but has quite a long way to go. And at the time of the events that we're going to talk about, I did communicate with the school board members in Glendale, just as an Armenian teacher, lesbian, to just say thank you for doing what you are needing to do to advocate for our students. So I really appreciate, I can't thank Talin and her teacher crew enough for holding it down for the Armenian people, and especially for the young LGBTQ kids in Los Angeles. So thank you. I'm honored to be here.
Thank you. Shant?
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for including me in this discussion. My name is Shant. I currently live in Glendale, California. I've been a long time advocate for both Armenian and LGBT plus issues and wherever they might intersect. I was on the Gallus board from 2016 to 2024. So I was on the board during the events of 2023. And having been present there at that GUSD meeting, I have a lot of thoughts. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you. Colleen, would you help us understand or frame the issue a little bit for people who might not be aware and might not have been paying attention at that time to the events that happened in sort of seemed like they culminated in June of 2023, right? That's when I felt it. That's when it was all over the news. Would you mind talking a little bit about what happened and what the controversy was?
Absolutely. I will try and keep it as brief as possible. I want to say that prior to June 2023, when our school board meetings were, were being presented on Zoom, it's a public meeting, and they were no longer accepting people to come down to the district office because of COVID. The buildings were shut down. So the meetings were now on Zoom, and I make it a part of my job to speak during public communications. Now I have a labor report where I present a message from labor at every single school board meeting. And I did so at that point too. I've been doing that throughout my whole presidency. So I was waiting in the Zoom to speak, and I started to notice speakers that identified themselves not as parents, but as folks in our community that were starting to discuss during public communications critical race theory being taught in our schools, right? Well, I'm a math teacher. I'm not a social studies teacher. And honestly, I didn't know what critical race theory was. So I started to Google it, and I started to research it, and I started to reach out to our social studies history teachers, and come to find that critical race theory is not part of high school curriculum, and it's not part of the framework for California public schools in terms of secondary schools. It is something that is taught in college, right? But that's how it all began, is I started to see communications from what appeared to be outside entities, not our parents, not people who had children in our schools, not people whose children were saying, this is what I learned in my classroom today. It wasn't coming from that. It was coming from folks that were what I call outside instigators, that were criticizing, that were complaining, that were using words like indoctrination and grooming of our students. And it started like that. And I thought it would not gain traction because these were folks that were not part of our school community. But then the more I studied it, the more I learned that this was part of a national effort to undermine public schools and public education, probably funded by corporations that were looking to privatize public schools because there's money to be made there for folks that are interested in tax dollars as profits, right? And so it started that way. And so once our doors opened again for in-person meetings, people were sitting in the audience with me. Typically, folks in the audience were minimal, maybe parents that had input to give during public communications or that were interested in an agenda item. might be in the audience. But when these folks start to show up, they start to share information during public communications that was untrue. And it wasn't coming, the information was not coming from a firsthand experience, right? It was coming from what they thought or what they were told by people who had not experienced our classrooms about what was happening in our classrooms. And a lot of the information that was shared from these people, these folks, was untrue. It was what our school board started calling disinformation, right? And so that disinformation started to grow, right? Particularly amongst the Armenian community, which was concerning to me, right? It was concerning because we as public school educators have a grade level and subject matter framework that we follow, determined by the state, determined by our legislators, and we are required to teach that as public school teachers. And so at that particular school board meeting, it was the June school board meeting of 2023. It was on the agenda for our school board was a resolution to acknowledge and celebrate Pride Month, right? It's something that it's something that our school board does every June. And it had been, that resolution had passed uneventfully in the past, right? Our LGBTQ plus community came out early. And when I got there, I noticed that there were police in the parking lot. They were setting up barricades. There were people that I've never seen at a school board meeting before that were wearing masks, so their faces were not obvious. They were holding American flags. And a lot of people in the parking lot were wearing "Leave Our Kids Alone" t-shirts. They were white t-shirts with black writing, and it said "Leave Our Kids Alone" on the t-shirt, right? And so very quickly, the parking lot with a middle barricade started to have an east side and a west side. The east side were the "Leave Our Kids Alone" folks, and the west side were the folks holding the pride flags and the folks who were holding signs saying, our community is for everyone, right? Everybody is welcome here. And so those two groups very quickly started to find each other, right? Even on the rainbow side, the side I call the rainbow side, there were folks that I didn't recognize, right, wearing masks. People were calling them Antifa. I honestly don't know what that means in terms of our school board meeting, but people were using those terms in a derogatory manner. But honestly, I was fearful. At that moment, I was fearful because there seemed to be a lot of angry people on the east side of our parking lot, the folks that were wearing the "Leave Our Kids Alone" t-shirts. And very quickly, I heard people say, "Oh, the Proud Boys are here." There were lots of people in the parking lot that typically don't attend our school board meetings. And it seemed to be east versus west side of the parking lot. And so then the discussion happened on the west side, whether or not we were going to do our group hug, our group chain, right? And so some of the teachers said, we shouldn't be deterred. Let's just do it right here on our side. Let's just lock hands and let's stand in solidarity in support of, our LGBTQ plus students and staff and employees and our community, essentially. And we did that. And while we were doing that, the other side was yelling obscenities. There were, words being thrown out like pedophile, pervert. We were being called perverts. A lot of derogatory words being called out. And at that moment, I noticed, and I honestly didn't recognize a lot of people on that side, but I did notice one person that was my student from my 5th period class and his mother, and they were both wearing those t-shirts. And I waved to him. He didn't acknowledge me, and he was yelling pedophile at me and pointing, right? And so I was shocked because I didn't really recognize anybody else, but I recognized that one student. And the next day, that one student came to class like nothing had occurred. And I stand in front of my classroom to welcome my students. And I welcomed him in and I said, "I saw you yesterday at the school board meeting." And my student didn't want to acknowledge that they were there. And I said to my student, "If you want to talk to me why I was, holding a rainbow flag, please come at lunchtime and you and I can have a conversation about what was happening yesterday at the school board meeting." Because really my concern was for my student. My student was yelling out words like pedophile and pervert at their teacher. And I wanted to make sure that this student didn't truly believe that of me, right? But he never did come. He never did come to speak to me. But I don't believe that my student believed I was a pedophile. I believe there was a mob mentality going on. And I believe that my my student was participating in an act that the adult, specifically his mother, was participating in, and I thought to myself, some people are going to have good role models, some people are going to have bad role models. And myself, I have to act like a good role model for my students.
So
And
one of
so
the
later
things,
on,
sorry, I just wanted to add that because you didn't specifically mention that a lot of the people on the East Side were in fact Armenian,
yes,
right? A
they
lot
were,
of these people associating with Proud Boys,
yeah.
which is a neo-Nazi group funded ultimately through dark money from right-wing organizations, that there were a ton of Armenians, and it really seemed to be, I would say majority Armenians and some Hispanic and some white on the leave our kids alone side, the side with the printed t-shirts and uniform messaging.
Yeah, that's how I could tell they were Armenian. They were, of course, they look like Armenians. Some of them were speaking Armenians. Some of them were active in our community. For example, one of them happens to be on the board of the Glendale Youth Alliance. So I was surprised to see that person there because this person didn't seem inclusive of all students, and yet they're on the board of the Glendale Youth Alliance. So how do you represent youth if you don't represent all youth, right? Later
Great
on, I
question.
was allowed in. Entrance to the school board meeting was limited, but as the president, I have a spot inside. So I was allowed into the school board meeting safe. And it was a difficult task to keep the space safe because there seemed to be a lot of, like you shared, Armenians that were angry about disinformation that they believed to be true about our classrooms. And then inside, during public communications, there was over an hour of people talking about what they believe is happening in our classrooms. None of it factual, none of it from actual parents that heard things from their students, right?
What did they believe?
They believe that teachers are indoctrinating students. They are confusing students. In high school, we have upwards of 180 students because we have 6 periods, right? And learning about your students is a daily job because however their mental, physical, emotional state is in October, that may change in November, right? So daily, we're checking in with our students to make sure that ensuring that they're, first of all, in our classrooms in a safe space, right? But also that they're having their needs met because we are mandated reporters. It's important for us to build relationships with our students so that they know that we are the adult on campus who is going to advocate for them, who is on their side. I used to tell my students all the time, I'm your Armenian mom on campus. If you need anything, if you've forgotten your lunch money, if you're hungry, if you're scared, if you need a safe space, come find me, right?
So it really seems like the teachers and the rainbow side really put the students' needs first. That's what I'm hearing over and over. And that the other side is sort of, they're calling it parental rights, but what it really means is don't talk to our kids about anything that goes against our religion, anything that goes against our beliefs, even if that makes them a well-rounded citizen, even if it's part of the school curriculum in California. No, it's our right to keep our children in the dark.
Well, meanwhile, every child walks in with a cell phone with no parental guidelines on them, right? So these students have access to
Clearly.
a lot of unfortunate things on TikTok and social media that parents are completely ignoring, right, in my opinion. But it's California curriculum and the FAIR Act. The FAIR Act allows for our curriculum to represent marginalized communities or folks that are typically forgotten in curriculum, right? And so our curriculum is prescribed by our state. It is a rich curriculum. I'm grateful to our legislators for creating this curriculum. And at every grade level, it's age appropriate. For example, in elementary schools, the curriculum has to do with different types of families because they exist in our schools, right? And it's important to understand that not all families have a mother and a father. Some families have just a grandmother. Some families have an adoptive parent, right? Some families have an uncle. Some families have 2 moms or 2 dads, right? And that is our community, right? And it's important for us to incorporate that in the curriculum so that we can build a healthy community in which to create safe spaces for all our students to learn. Nobody's going to learn algebra if they don't feel safe in my classroom, right? Or physics, or algebra 2, or calculus, right? So the safety aspect is very important, and building community with all of our students is important.
The others to get a chance to weigh in a little bit about what it was like for you in any aspect that you want to cover, that what it was like emotionally to see yourselves covered like that, and pitting Armenianness and queerness against one another, what that was like for you.
It was ironic, not in a good way, because ever since September 27th, 2020, having been glued to media and watching, hearing, listening, reading the plethora of disinformation, misinformation, propaganda, defamation spewed by Azerbaijan and Turkey and their allies about Armenians pertaining to the Artsakh genocide. Here I was reading, hearing, listening, watching pretty much the same style of disinformation, propaganda against LGBTQ and such. It was disappointing, especially when Armenians were involved. And it's important to say that they don't represent the entire Armenian community, obviously, but sometimes it still needs to be said. They were a small group. Usually those types of fringe groups are very loud. So it seems like they're the leading voice, but they're not. I have friends and acquaintances and colleagues in both Glendale and LA Unified, and I know that was not the case. Nonetheless, it was disconcerting. It was also disconcerting that the Proud Boys were basically egging everyone on and putting Armenians and Latinos also at the front lines to fight their fight when they were, basically the masterminds of it. I remember reading a post on X. This non-Armenian guy was like, yeah, good for you Armenians to do this and da-da-da. And I replied back to him and I said, for the last 2+ years at the time, Armenians have been slaughtered halfway around the world. It's a genocide happening. Where were you? So now that the Armenians are sort of fighting your fights, all of a sudden you care and you are an ally and this and that. I was just very conflicted because seeing this from the Armenian community was just really, really disappointing, but I don't hold back. So I said my piece, and I'm also the founder of Truth and Accountability League, or TAL, which is an anti-defamation organization that started with 6 years ago to monitor politicians, groups, organizations, political groups, media, academics for any anti-Armenian, anti-Armenia disinformation, propaganda, defamation, etc. And we've also expanded to include all minority groups, people who are disfranchised, including LGBTQ. So how do you balance that, right? Because one day the person you're correcting is an Azerbaijani, and the next day is an Armenian person who's heard something, third hand, and all of a sudden the trans are going to eat you in the restroom, and the gays are coming for you, and all this sort of nonsense. At the end of the day, this is homophobia. Homophobia, I love how a lot of people, not just Armenians, but would start their either speeches or their posts on social media or articles saying, I have nothing against gay people or LGBTQ people, but, and I'd say, you know what? You actually do, because you just do. Look in the mirror. The homophobia is no longer this black and white thing where, one group says, let's put all the queers on an island and let them die. And the other side is like, they're great. Let them design my dresses, which also is a kind of a stereotype on its own. But anyways, there are a lot of people who don't understand how homophobic they are, and they're fooling themselves. You hear someone say, I love gay people. My coworker's gay. We go to lunch. My stylist is gay, and I go to gay bars and have a good time. There are two questions you ask an Armenian to test their homo friendliness. And these are the two questions that stops them. Like they just kind of freeze. The first one is, if you were hiring a babysitter for your kids and the most qualified person was a gay man, would you hire him? And the second one, which ironically is a lighter subject, but it's even more troubling for them. You say, your daughter is getting married. You have a big wedding. If you invite your cousin, like you've invited all other cousins, he's gay and he's going to bring a date. Would you invite him? And I can't tell you how many people have just frozen with that question. So homophobia is very gray, different shades of gray. And a lot of people sort of fall into it. And fairly, I'll have to say this too. Even some of us queer people have internalized homophobia. And that can happen
Absolutely.
to out there. Bottom line, and just to finish with this is this. Whatever is good enough for my heterosexual counterparts is good enough for me. And I am not responsible for the disinformation that you are consuming and you're running with it. That is just your problem. Equality means everyone's equal. The queer or LGBTQ movement is not about anything else but the right to be average. We want the right to be average. That's it.
The right to live, for the queer kids in the classroom hearing these messages, for the queer kids of these Armenians out there protesting who are seeing what their parents are doing and how their parents are speaking, and know without saying a word that they are not safe in their own homes. I know a lot of Armenian folks think that they don't have a problem with gay people, and this is gay people. This is about indoctrinating our children. This is about teaching our children how to have gay sex, if that's what a school would teach, or enabling sex changes for kids at school, which is ridiculous. If you've tried to get an aspirin at school, you know how difficult it is, how many restrictions the nurse has on what they can give out. So there is a ton of misinformation, a ton of, like you correctly said, not understanding what homophobia is. And then when you get funding and messaging provided from unknown sources, except that when you trace it, it goes back to things like the Heritage Foundation behind Project 2025 that funds dark money into all these groups. That aside, they are using our community against us to further their own agenda, which is the destruction of public education. But that's neither here nor there for this conversation. I want to know, Shant and Hasmig, how these events affected you.
Sure. Hi there. Yeah, I was there at the GUSD protest in 2023. I was thankfully able to get inside, so I didn't see the worst of it outside. I was there basically just giving public comments, saying something to the effect of, thank you for supporting the community. Had I had this growing up, my life would be better and XYZ. And immediately after I gave my public comment, a local elected official basically rushed me out to safety, drove me off to a few blocks away, just as a precaution. It was, I was aware that there were these prejudices in the Armenian community and people butted heads, but that day really exposed an ugly side to the underbelly of the community. And I've been working basically to make bridges where I can with the community, but there's only so much that one can do when you're put up against this entire web of dark money with outside agitators. I've been doing my part on my end here in Glendale. I was with Gallus. More recently, I'm active with Glendale Out, which is a grassroots organization here in Glendale. And doing the simplest things, like we have a monthly community meetup where we have coffee, but we're still portrayed as these evil people. Local elected officials and candidates are I don't hate gay people, but these Glendale Out people are extremists. They're crazy. And it's just fighting tooth and nail just to get the basics in Glendale, for Glendale Out, there's an annual Pride event that's basically a small picnic in a local park where the community, it's basically a grassroots event, not sponsored or hosted by the city, because God forbid the city of Glendale puts on an official event. And it's just fighting just for recognition. The one time the organization tried to get public funding from the city, it was several weeks back and forth, elected officials going, we support the gay community, but we don't want to support this organization, or we don't want to, whatever it might be. So it's just wrangling over the minutiae for things that would be normal standard things in other cities.
They threatened Glendale Pride that year because there was a planned drag queen story hour, which I normally take my kid to, although she's a little bit older now. But I love those events. They're really fun. They're sweet. They're very innocent. A beautiful drag queen reading children's books to kids that are completely age appropriate. And there was a drag queen named who was supposed to speak at read at Glendale Pride, and the Proud Boys threatened physical violence. They threatened to come by and shoot up and beat up anybody at the park. And there was a huge police presence. And much to her credit, Pickle still showed up in red. But there was just a lot of tension. And I'm sure a lot of people stayed away because of that fear, which is very, very sad to me.
I was at that event, and the folks that were there, we had a wonderful time. There were children. Pickle was there. Pickle did a wonderful job. We celebrated our gay community. And at that park, it felt like a little bit of a haven, right? But on the outskirts in the rest of the city, there was turmoil with the haters, the people who spread hate and hate speech and disinformation. Those people had an issue with it, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. Sean, I believe you were there too. And I participate every year at that event. So it's important for our allies to come out and support and bring their kids and celebrate our gay community. There was no issues with what happened exactly at the park, at the event. It was wonderful. It was the haters that had issue with it. And often I find that hatred is really a reflection of turmoil inside a person, right? That they have a lot of healing to do. I don't know where that issue comes from, but I feel like somebody's external hatred and hate speech really reflects their inability to deal with their own skeletons or their own issues or their own trauma in the past, right? And honestly, for those folks, I want healing. I want them to heal. I want them to learn. I want them to grow. I want them to thrive and accept our entire community. And folks, I want them to accept folks when people present themselves authentically. Everybody has the right to present themselves authentically. Gay rights are human rights. Christian rights are human rights. Trans rights are human rights. They're all human rights, and we all have the right to exist as our authentic selves, and in a way that makes us happy, because a happy community is going to be a better place to exist.
I think I'd like to hear from you and what your experience was like.
Yeah, I mean, I have some, of course, I was far away from Los Angeles when this was happening. I was actually in Armenia at the time when I was reading about this and felt really kind of distressed. And I know a couple of the folks from Pink Armenia, and there are some really, strong LGBTQ advocacy groups in Armenia proper, who deals with a degree of homophobia and injustice that I don't even know that we'll be able to get to. I have a couple of different thoughts. I'm fascinated by the fact that a lot of the origins of this was the kind of concerns around critical race theory and the required ethnic studies curriculum in California, which I imagine Glendale also has to teach, right? And within the ethnic studies controversies, as some of you probably know, there was this, do we teach the Armenian genocide? Do we teach Armenians as white people or not white people? Are Armenians considered a kind of a classified a group, a protected group? The state of California really came down on this. The Department of Education basically said, if you are in a community that has a large Vietnamese population, a large Armenian population, a large Black population, you can, in fact, with Black population, that doesn't count, because the four ethnic groups that are covered, right, in ethnic studies are African American, Chicano, Latino, Native American, and Asian American. And then if you have a group that's outside of that in your community, like Glendale does, then you better be doing something on Armenian identity and Armenian history, because it's going to really be relevant to those kids. So I find it really fascinating that the kind of the origin of this is like this concern that we are going to be talking about white power and white privilege, and then and Armenians want to be front and center in having their history really acknowledged and recognized as a group of people that are not oppressed people, but are survivors of identity oppression, and then are have no problem and do not see the connection when they turn around and are on the front lines of identity oppression when it's a different identity. Now, I think the silver lining, when I came out to my very Armenian family that lived from Glendale to Lebanon, it was really difficult to come out as a 19-year-old Armenian to a relatively, they wouldn't call themselves conservative, but it was a little bit like you're saying, right? I'm fine with gay people, but are you okay with, I was interested with the two questions because Vic, I thought you were going to say the questions were, are you okay with your kid being gay? Like, you didn't even go there. You started with can someone bring a gay partner to a wedding, which to me seems like, duh, right? These, I came out at a time where people were not talking about it. I mean, the name of this podcast is Amot. It's, it was Amot. It was really shameful and nobody was talking about it. So to me, there was some little silver lining of having Armenians being forced in their homes, in their living rooms, probably by their own young children in that school district, starting to actually talk about sexuality, maybe. I feel like the part about the Proud Boys and the outside agitators, that's just where we are right now in the United States. That's everywhere, right? Anytime we have a protest or anything that we think is a local issue, those guys show up.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we have to separate the like outside agitation and the Trump universe and that world that's kind of coming for us and continuing to come for us, and our own Armenian people. But to me, the possibility that Armenian kids, teenagers, were actually starting to have conversations, even if they were uncomfortable, in their households in that time period about gay and lesbian issues, that would be a step forward, even if it was really difficult. And I don't know if that was the case. I'm curious what kids' experience was, like what actual students in the Glendale USD's experience was. But the noise from the outside folks, I feel like we have to be really good as advocates, as educators, to be like, no, you guys, and it's what you said, Tallinn, like the party was great. Those guys on the outside, whatever, they were doing their thing, but the party was great. And I think we have to kind of keep that focus.
My daughter was going to an Armenian private school at the time, and she knows her mom is out and clear. And I think to support me, she was drawing rainbows and decorating things with rainbow stickers. And she was in the 4th grade at this time. And the boys in her class were very, very angry. And they started ripping up her stickers and ripping up her drawings. And they were like, that's disgusting. That's inappropriate for school. The kid was drawing rainbows. Right. So the teacher had to put an end to everything. We spoke to the administration. The administration said, "We'll take a position on controversial policies. Of course, we'll handle bullying and any sort of outward behavior, but we're not taking a stance on this." And that was when I decided to pull my kid out of school. I was like, this is not, we're done here. We're done here. You're not speaking to our community. And I didn't know it then, but my daughter, who is now 13, is out and queer herself. And it was really interesting to me that I was fighting this battle anyway. I'm a long-time co-activist. I didn't know that I was also fighting it for my daughter. And that really brings it home. And I'm proud of myself for protecting her and taking her out of this environment that was just an unnatural environment. This is not the way that this is not the feeling of the most of the people that live in the city, right, or in Southern California. This is a small group. And I also wanted to add something about what this did to me emotionally when I was there during the protests. I think it was after the June 6th event, so I knew that violence was possible. But I'd shown up with Queer Nation at one of the school board meetings, and I remembered feeling this incredible dissonance. When I thought about it later, it occurred to me that I had always, my entire life, felt safe around Armenians, right? That was my safe place. In a crowd, in a social setting, I knew that an Armenian man would protect me if somebody were harassing me or bothering me. And for the first time, I was the target. I felt absolutely personally in physical danger because, make no mistake, these folks, some of them, did follow protesters to their cars, did threaten and intimidate them, did break windshields, did beat people up. So to me, that I no longer, and it hasn't left me, I no longer feel safe in Armenian spaces, period. That's what this did to me emotionally. I don't
Yeah.
know if any of you had a similar
Well,
experience.
I feel safe around Armenian gay men for
Yeah.
certain. It's the Armenian heterosexual men who believe and spread misinformation in the name of religion, right? And Vic is right. They identify that they speak for all Armenians, but they certainly don't represent all Armenians, right? I want to say that this Armenian hate group used to call themselves on social media GUSD Parent Voices, but they have shut down that page. And now they call themselves the Armenians of Glendale.
Ugh.
And they do not represent the Armenians of Glendale. They may represent MAGA and, hate speech and disinformation and spreading lies, but they don't necessarily represent what all Armenians, think and feel. And certainly in our public schools, they don't represent that because public schools do not turn away folks. We are open to our public and we accept it. Public schools need to be welcoming, safe spaces for everybody, for all of our community. And I 100% agree with Vic how the Armenians in that parking lot that day were using tactics that I believe the leaders of the Ottoman Empire used to dehumanize Armenians, right? To see an Armenian dehumanize a gay person, to me, tells me they don't understand their history. This happened to our ancestors, right? You don't understand your history. You're using hate speech and dehumanizing words against a population. And some of these people are in your family. And when I would hear the vitriol from the public communications, I would think to myself, please don't let this person's child, or I think to myself, how will this person's child, if they're gay, be safe, right? You think about the suicide rates, for young children and how that's exponentially higher for gay kids. And you think this is somebody's parent speaking these words about children who may be discovering themselves, and children have the right to their own journey, to discover themselves and to live their authentic life and to evolve into what is going to be their happiest selves, right? That's how children learn curriculum and critical thinking skills and building the social network in their classrooms and having safe spaces to thrive and engage and interact. But if they're hearing the adults in their home, spew hate speech, what is going to become of those children? And that concerns me the most, especially, of course, Armenian children. While I've been teaching in Glendale, I have promoted Armenian genocide education. When I was on the bargaining team, one of my reasons to be part of the bargaining team was to ensure that April 24th, when it's a school day, became a pupil-free, teacher-free day in order for students to participate in walks and whatever was happening during the day. And then to have the Armenian community, turn around and call me a fake Armenian or an Armenian that is not a true Armenian and call themselves pure Armenians. It was just rhetoric that was, from the Project 2025 book, as you say, Laura, just hate speech to divide, to create fear in people. And honestly, a community that is full of fear and hate is not a fun place to be. It's not a great place to be. And that's not the type of community that I want for our schools, for our public schools, for our city, and for the Armenian community.
I wanted to add up a point to everything we've discussed. One of them is this whole grooming thing. We produced a PSA about grooming, and I actually just shared my personal information because my life's like an open book. So I basically said, listen, if grooming was possible, if you could groom someone to change their sexual orientation, gender identity, or anything else, I would have changed, because having been born the youngest child and the only son of the patriarch of this family of 11 children, my dad, I was basically raised and groomed to marry a nice Armenian girl and have kids and follow my dad's legacy and all of that. But here I am, I'm gay, and you just got to tell them this. It's absurd. You can't change someone's eye color by grooming, or hair color by grooming. You can't do it with sexual orientation, gender identity, all of that. The other thing is, and I have to sort of hold us, the queer Armenian community, accountable too a little bit, and without judgment. But here's the thing. For a long time, I've noticed this from some people, apologetically out, or somewhat out, but not quite out. And we haven't, just like women who are still making 76 cents to $1 if a man makes, they haven't demanded their space and respect. And queer Armenians are still a little bit apologetic for being gay. Okay. And we need to change that and say, I'm gay. If that's a problem for you. And that's that. Because you're not going to get respect if they see that you are trying to placate them, or you are minimizing yourself, and you're compromising your principles, or anything less than 100% equality. So if a straight couple in Yerevan can walk down the street holding hands, so can I with a guy. And I've done it, just to make a point. It's tell Armenians all the time regarding Armenians in the international arena. I mean, we saw how we were ignored again during the Artsakh genocide, is that nobody's rights are just handed to them because they ask politely or with pragmatism or diplomacy. It doesn't happen. You have to demand it. You have to fight for it. And unfortunately, there's some casualties in the way, and it's the same thing with us queer Armenians. Like, we have to be more aggressive. We have to be pushy, no other word to say it, and just really, really push back because, it was really bad what happened at, Unified and LA Unified at the elementary school here in North Hollywood is that it really took us back. And of course, these are the stories that amplified in local news, right? And we really need to push back and say, you don't get to write my narrative. You don't get to tell me who I am and my space as an Armenian, because the truth is that most Armenians are not that kind of homophobic bigots. And one last thing is this. We also need to hold to account our heterosexual so-called allies who are Armenian, because some of them are cool with us. They love us and, all of that. But when they're in spaces where there are no gay people, whether it's a dinner party of 10 or a wedding or something, uh, they stay quiet when homophobia comes up, verbally, etc. And we need to say, you know what? Don't call yourself a gay ally if you're not going to, if you're going to preserve your self-interest and not say or correct someone who just said the word faggot or who just said, blah, 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 blah. We got to take this to the next level and demand that, maybe not demand, but maybe, hold our straight allies and say, it's not enough that when you're with me one-on-one, you love me to death. No, an ally actually fights for you and puts themselves in, sometimes even in, a disadvantage, but still fight for equality and what's right, because it does affect our Armenian cause collectively. For example, when European Union is looking at Armenia's last, let's say, 8 years, right? And they're saying, okay, economically, you've grown, your GDP is incredible, your tourism is incredible, you've become a tech hub, blah, 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 blah. But then they come to human rights and they point right at LGBTQ rights. And that affects Armenia. People don't realize how much it affects this one piece of land we have left, as big as Rhode Island, that we have to preserve. And for that, if it's just for that alone, we need to hold ourselves accountable.
Challenging the stereotypes, challenging the homophobia is something that is very important. And I agree with you. We absolutely need to get better at that. We need to be more vocal. I think a lot of people are afraid of being kicked out of the Armenian club, so it is very difficult to navigate those spaces and stay socially acceptable. So it does take some courage, and we need to continue doing that in our community. I wanted to pivot a little bit and talk about what this curriculum means to queer kids in the classroom, Armenian and not Armenian, what it means to see themselves represented, to see themselves included in history, literature, sciences, and how that benefits non-queer kids in the classroom, right? So if anybody would like to speak to that, that'd be great.
I mean, I can speak a little bit to what I think is I think what really matters about the California curriculum is that it does not just parse out individual identities, but it really talks about intersectionality, which is, I think, what we need to talk more about in the Armenian community, because I think it's really easy to grow up in an Armenian household being told and thinking all you are is Armenian, that's what you are, or Armenian and Christian, and you're nothing else, and not being able to weave all these other parts of your identity in it. I think the curriculum, like any curriculum, when somebody sees themselves in a curriculum, I can't remember who was saying it, but they were like, if I had had this growing up, I would have had, you could have maybe saved yourself 10 years of therapy and 10 years of self-hatred or whatever else, if there was a teacher who you trusted and respected in front of you saying, and these are all the different families, or these are all, when you're older and is more age appropriate, this is how sexuality, this is the different sexual identities, this is the different gender identities. I know that people were really freaked out about, the idea that their kid might be questioning their gender identity. And I think the meaning is, like, any time you are reflected in the curriculum, you feel validated. And particularly if you're growing up in a home where you're hearing negative things all the time, if somebody you trust, respect, admire is in front of you speaking in positive ways about that, not positive like you should all be gay positive, but like these are all of the things that you might find out about yourself one day. we're here for that, you know? One question I had was if Glendale in general has gay straight alliances and if the high school had a GSA and their role in something like this, because again, it's not just adults teaching kids, but you know, in Berkeley, we have students coming in and doing presentations for students. And so it takes kind of that adult indoctrination piece out of it. And I just really wonder like if there were supportive spaces and if there are still growing supportive spaces in the high schools for young people who are queer. And not to take your conversation in a different direction, but that's just something I'm curious about, because I think when we think about kids' mental health, the school plays a really important role, right? And again, the naysayers and the outside voices and the parents screaming at the kid at home, there's not a lot we can do about that, you know, for that family, but there's a lot we can do in a school environment to make sure a kid feels well.
Yeah, in terms of, and Hasmik, thank you for your comments. And I 100% agree with you that when kids see themselves or their families or their ethnicity or their anything that they could relate to in the curriculum, they garners motivation for them to learn, right? They feel a sense of belonging in the school community. We do have GSAs on all of our secondary campuses, including our middle schools. And so definitely those clubs exist. Those clubs put on events. Folks that want to come support the events, they come and support the events. Folks that don't want to come support the events, they don't have to come, right? So if this is something that you don't want to support, don't be there. But why not? It's part of the community, right? This is something that our students are participating in, and it's important for teachers to come out and support them, right? I'm glad it's the law. In our state, it is the law to have that representation, right? And it is in court. And our teachers, we have a lot of professional development. Our teachers do a lot of planning. We have a curriculum studies committee, a curriculum review committee. We have supplemental resources that teachers can use aside from the state approved books that we use. And the books don't decide the curriculum. The ed code decides the framework decides the California Department of Education decides the curriculum, right? And it's a teacher's job to use best practices to teach that curriculum. And that curriculum is designed to have a student grow, right? To have a student grow academically, emotionally, critical thinking skills, all of the above. In terms of building community in our classrooms, lots of teachers are using tools that they have to build community. For example, in my math class, I hold restorative circles. It's difficult to give up a period of instruction for a restorative circle, but at the beginning of the school year, it's important for me to allow my students an ability to hear about each other, right? If they want to share their pronouns, it's important for me to allow them a safe space to share their pronouns. They don't have to share their pronouns. It's important for me to call a student the name they want to be called, right? For example, Levon wanted me to call him Leo, even though I told him Levon is my dad's name. I have no issues calling you Levon, but he wanted me to call him Leo. And Alicia wanted me to call them Aaron, right? I have no issues calling a child the name that they want to be called in my classroom so that I address them in the way that is respectful. It's about respect, right? And that they feel comfortable learning about each other in my classroom, because I also have them learn in collaborative groups. They work together. I change their groups every month. I want them to feel safe, build community. All of those things lead to an environment in which a child can thrive, which is what we want. That's why my parents came to America. I was born in Lebanon. My parents came to America so that I could thrive. I could receive an education. I could become a productive member of my community. I'm certain that our Armenian parents want this for their children. They came here, they put their children in public schools so that their children could thrive and grow and become the best versions of themselves. But then when Armenian parents put conditions on those things, then they're going to create limitations for their children to thrive. And they're going to create spaces where their children don't feel safe within their own home. And I can't imagine that a parent would want that intentionally, right? That a parent would want to intentionally block the growth of their child living their best life, right? And so it's important to help those parents. I remember I had one parent ask me, would you be okay with your child being gay? And my response to that parent was, I would love my child no less. I would love my child just as much, if not more, for having the courage to live a life that some parents discount or want to cancel or eliminate, right? And so I would have no issues with my child being gay. I would love them just as much. And I think you would too. I think that you would too. So it's really about helping the parents that don't know any better, to help them grow. I've asked some parents that have questioned me about, the rainbow flag in my classroom. Do you have any gay friends? Do you know any gay people? And if you don't, please go out and make some. Right. Go to some events, support some events, learn about our community, learn about how you can be supportive of people who exist and are productive members of our community.
I'm probably going to get some flack for this and maybe even regret it, but I just have to add something a little humorous. There was a night when I was sort of watching all this unfold, and I was just kind of really irritated. And I posted on social, I said, few select Armenians are so homophobic. Do you know where your husband is tonight? I just saw him on Grindr looking for trans women.
I mean, that's a thing. Let's not pretend that doesn't happen. There are a lot of seemingly heterosexual marriages where somebody's been forced into it, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my text was flooded. People are laughing and saying, "Oh my God, thanks for saying that." I go to Armenia a lot. I've been there like 11 times since 2018, and it's the same thing there. I'm like, really? Who do I believe? The fact that you keep saying we're traditional people or Grindr? Because they don't really match.
Sad to not be able to be your authentic self as a full-grown adult.
And not that I'm judging those people. Also, this other thing that's been weaponized. There are two things that have been weaponized. Once, we all know it's the kids, right? Weaponizing your children against someone's human rights, right? Oh my God, my kids are going to hear this and just, a book that says some kids have 2 mommies and 2 daddies. Oh my God, my kid's ears traumatized, blah, 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 blah. The other thing that's been weaponized is this thing where I hear from a lot of people who probably never go to church, unless it's a wedding or a funeral, who say, we're traditional people, we are blah, 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 our faith is da, 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 da. And which is, I can go into a whole other thing this is not the time or the place about the disinformation of what the Bible says and doesn't say. I just attend a Bible school on Sundays till 7th grade, but I actually have Bible class daily. But this weaponization of traditional people, what does that mean? Like, what does that really mean, traditional people? So like smacking your wife as a tradition is okay too? Like anything backward or anything that's like, from the Middle Ages, we just carry it and say we're traditional people? Or where are we going to be in 200 years if we keep using that? It's not an excuse, it's bullshit.
I really also want to make the point that the curriculum, the diversity and inclusion curriculum saves lives when it comes to queer kids in the classroom. And that's not an exaggeration in any way. Like you were saying, Talene, earlier, that the statistics for queer kids attempting suicide nationally is more than double their heterosexual counterparts. And we're talking about, kids as young as 8 and 9 years old, all the way up to high school. 40% of LGBTQ plus kids have seriously considered taking their lives in the last year. So this is very much a life or death issue for the queer kids, but that's not the only person in the classroom who benefits from it. Nationally, 90% of LGBTQ plus children are bullied either physically or verbally at some point in their school life. And this also helps to normalize and destigmatize queer existence for the kids who, if they never hear about it, and if all they hear are their backwards parents at home, are going to think, yeah, these kids are weird. These kids are wrong. That's against the Bible, whatever they're doing. They need that counter education to say, like, no, these people have always existed. This is a part of our culture. It's a part of our society. And normalizing things, which is silly to even say about these, but this is the world we live in right now, will help to lower the instances of bullying and verbal and physical abuse that queer kids go through.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to put that out there.
100% agree. I also noticed that a lot of these folks that are participating in hate speech, and I 100% agree that if you hear something, you should say something. Hate speech is not acceptable. If you hear somebody participating in hate speech, you should let them know that's hate speech. It's meant to dehumanize people. It might instill violence in some people. Why are you using hate speech? And please don't use it around me, right? Those are some things that I say around relatives because I will not tolerate hate speech. I don't want to be a witness to it. And I want people to learn that that's hate speech. That's not acceptable. But the other thing that I notice around folks who use hate speech is they themselves sexualize everything. They are so interested in the sexual organs of people. It's really none of their business. None of their business, right? And when they hear the word gay, they automatically think about sex. And I tell them, sex is personal. It's none of your business what an adult does with another adult, right? To me, it's about love. People living their true lives is really about love. And like Vic said, you have no right to decide who somebody else can and cannot love, right? You have no right to decide that. People get to decide that for themselves. I get to decide who I love, and they get to decide who they love, and they are not going to live by your definitions of what love should be like, right? You do your love and they get to do their love. And so the amount of sexualization is just astonishing, because when folks think about trans people, they automatically think about parts that are none of their business. None of their business. Just keep your mind out of the gutter is what I like to tell some of those people, because it's not up to you how I get to identify in terms of gender, how I get to, what my sexual orientation is. All of those things are my religious affiliation. All of those things are personal, and should be none of your business. You live your life the way you want to, and I live my life the way I want to, and we should accept each other for that, because as an Armenian community, we have not had those freedoms, and our ancestors have not had those freedoms, right?
I just want to add something. We've been bagging on our people a lot, and I want to highlight something positive. And this is truly my experience. We've already said that the majority of Armenians don't have that hatred toward them. In fact, I will support that by saying that unlike Azerbaijan and Turkey, where their population is just brainwashed to hate Armenians, when you go to Armenian, you don't see or feel that poison amongst Armenians. Armenians don't sit around cafes and say, Azerbaijanis this and Turkish that. It just doesn't happen because we don't have that in us. And it's good. The other thing I've noticed is when I've been out for 25 years and I shot out of the closet, and a month after coming out, I took a date to a cousin's wedding, which was like a very controversial at the time. But when I talk to someone one-on-one and I tell them my story of how I felt different at 3 years old and how I went on Lent at 18 to turn straight. I did like a 40-day of Lent, and how I saw a therapist at 19 for a year when I was making like $750 an hour going to college. They really get it. And that's when there's a shift, when you have a personal story rather than we just talk in general terms. And a really quick story. So I went as a kid, my parents would take me to Armenia. In 2018, I went for the first time as an adult. And I hired this guide / driver named Girard. He was from Gumbi and an ex-boxer, professional boxer. He was 28, tough guy, as tough macho as we can get. I'd taken my friend John with me, who's, non-Armenian, Catholic and all of that. And we go around all over Armenia every day. The topic that we were gay had never come up. Otherwise, I would have said it. But it just never had come up. So one day we go to a restaurant, and the owner of the restaurant was a woman and came down and said, I guess she heard that I was Armenian American. I was in Armenia, blah, blah, blah. She said, I want you to meet my daughter. When you're done, come upstairs. And I just politely sort of, let it be and such. And she went upstairs, and Gira said, wait, why not? What's wrong with you? I was like, oh, Lord, now I got to start, because I don't hold back. I said, well, Gira, I don't like women that way. And for about 5 seconds, he was looking at me, and I did not know where it was going to go. He could kick my ass with like all of his hands and legs.
Goodness.
And then I explained him, I explained the whole thing really quickly. And then he just turned around and said, so you were born this way? I was like, yeah. The next day, John and I wanted to stay at the hotel. We didn't call him to pick us up. And we'd already been friends on Facebook. He hooked me, he hit me up and said, did I offend you something, or anything like that? You haven't called me. I said, no, Girard, we're just not going out today. And I thought, okay, even if he's homophobic, we're paying you really well. Of course, he's going to sort of pretend that he's okay with it. But let me just tell you, he was never he was never uncomfortable around us after that. There was no friction, nothing. And what proved to me that this was genuine was the time right after that trip, I went back to Armenia and I didn't need a driver or a tour guide. And I contacted him just to say hi. He invited me to his family's house for lunch with my okay, his like wife and parents and brother-in-law and all of that. So they really, people get it when you tell your personal story. And actually, I have to say, I've experienced that a lot more in Armenia.
What do you think that says? That you've experienced that more in Armenia than in the diaspora?
Well, I'll be blunt because my publication is called The Blunt Post. I think Hayastansis, Armenians from Armenia, are a lot more teachable and are open to learning and understanding. There's a lot of like this arrogant, I know everything, I am morally superior amongst, I won't say the names, the rest of us. You know, I mean, my background's Parskahai. You know, there's this like sort of, you know, yeah, I just know.
Always wondered if that was because the diaspora and Armenians are trying to hold on to maybe an outdated definition of what it means to be Armenian, right? We have the genocide survivors' definition of what Armenian was, and then maybe in a lot of ways, emotionally, psychologically, those are stuck in 1915 standards. And we as a community, I think, haven't resolved within ourselves how we change that and still maintain our Armenianness.
Well,
I hear that a lot.
if you look at Armenian history, there have been queer royalty. There have been kings and queens who were gay, bi, lesbian, you know, all of that. And also in our not so ancient history, we've had charans and we've had filmmakers and such. And in my opinion, one of our most famous composers too, but I won't say it, you know, so it's there. I mean, whether they want to see it and accept it is a different thing, but it's there.
We need a queer Armenian history book. Who's up for the challenge?
I think, listening to you guys talk, I think it's I think that Armenians in the diaspora, many of us, or maybe our parents, or those of us that came here a little younger, were really trying to hold on to the Armenianness of us, right? And to sort of keep the Armenian as pure and clean as possible, right? So growing up, it was like, you're going to grow up, you're going to marry an Armenian man. I mean, that was the expectation. I have 3 sisters, so... And, it was and we weren't so involved in the church Christianity wise, but you couldn't go outside of the church, right? So it's like, it's not like you had to participate in the church and believe everything, because I actually find Armenians to be more atheist than any, like any other immigrant group, right? That they hang on to their Christianity as like, this is the reason we were persecuted. We were the first Christians. Like, this is a really important part of our history. And yet many of them don't actually like follow the faith, to the letter of the law. But there is some sort of like, these are the things it is to be Armenian. You marry an Armenian, you have children with an Armenian, you're an educated person, you belong to the Armenian church, you know how to cook. I mean, it was just like, there's like 5 things. And I think the minute you went outside of that, there was a fear of infiltration of other cultures, right? So like, if you go out, even if I married an Armenian lesbian, it's like you're going outside of the sort of expectation. And I remember when I came out, some very, very like innocently naive family members were like, but how are you going to have kids? It's like, well, you want me to explain that to you? But how are you going to, it kind of broke their brains. But then the minute I did it, they all danced at my wedding. They helped me baptize my child at St. Vartan's in Oakland. I mean, like, so like the minute you break their brains, they're like, oh, you're Armenian, they're Armenian, everyone's Armenian, and you're gay, and oh well. And you move on. I think we can do it. I believe that our community has the ability to do that. I just think it requires more of us being out and more of us being kind of very comfortable and casual about, not shamefully out, like was being said earlier.
I definitely agree. I agree.
A very silent moment.
Well, I what I wanted to add is I agree with Hasmig's definition of the traditional Armenian family, right? I've always said I grew up in Van Nuys, but the 4 walls of my house were not Van Nuys. My parents resisted assimilation, right? And so I was very used to the customs of the Armenian, religious holidays and traditions and to, to the church. And, when I went to public school up until high school, and then my parents decided I wasn't Armenian enough. And so they put me at Ferahian, which was a culture shock to me, right? Because in 10th grade, I was learning how to read and write in Armenian. So I was an Armenian as a second language student, perhaps. But my parents decided at that point I needed more exposure to being Armenian, right? And what I've recognized throughout my 59 years is that Armenians are very diverse. And often I've had my students raise their hand and ask, are you married to an Armenian, Miss Arsenian? Because they didn't necessarily believe that I was Armenian, right? And I said, I was married to an Armenian. I'm no longer married to an Armenian. I'm divorced, right? And so I never hid the fact that I am Armenian, right? And I would encourage people to open up their stereotypes or their definitions, just be more open to all of these different types of Armenians. And often I would share, well, let me help you learn about what type of Armenian I am, because I am Armenian, right? And this is my story. And every Armenian has a story, especially the diaspora, because we've been pushed away from our homelands, and we've had to navigate. My family had to navigate traveling from our traditional Armenian lands, which are now in Turkey, right, to Lebanon, and then leaving civil war in Lebanon to America, and to maintain a level of identity in terms of my nationality. I'm an Armenian who has never stood on Armenian soil. I have never been to Armenia, but I am 100% Armenian, and that's how I define myself. And I get to do that for myself, right?
Eileen, we've got to get you there.
I know. But nobody
We-
gets to tell me whether or not I'm Armenian or not. This is how I live my Armenian authentic life, right? And yes, I do need to make it to Armenia. It's on my bucket list.
Yeah, whenever I get into, I normally I won't take the bait and get into a debate with stupid. But once in a while, you have to like put someone in their place. And when they have nothing to say and you rebuttal the Christian quotes, you rebuttal good tradition, all of that stuff, they go, well, you're not even Armenian. Your last name doesn't end with IN or YAN. And then one time I wrote and I said, well, neither does Charles Aznavour. And they go, oh, you're comparing yourself to Charles Aznavour. I said, no, I'm not comparing myself to Charles Aznavour. I'm just simply saying there are a lot of Armenians whose last name do not end with IAN or YAN. Anything to just sort of like fight you back, and to make you different. And one of the toughest decisions in my first documentary about Artsakh genocide, Motherland, was you would think I interviewed 9 members of Congress and I had to cut 2 of them. That was not the most difficult thing, or taking 43 hours of footage to a 2-hour footage. The most difficult one, it took me months of talking to people and producers, and was whether I was going to be an out gay man in the film. Whether that be a distraction or does it actually contribute to the story and what we're trying to do here. And I ultimately decided to do it, and I didn't. And I said, if someone doesn't like it, they don't have to watch it. And it's ended up being something that people always talk to me about, say, we like that personal touch that you compare prosecution of gay people to what's happening to Armenians and everybody else. Chile, Uganda, Holocaust, Cambodia, and now the Palestinians.
Palestine, yeah.
I'm going to put a question out there for all of you. What is it that you want Armenians to understand about any of these issues?
Mine is short and simple. Gender identity, sexual orientation are like eye color, hair color. Accept it, get over it. You can't fight it. And even at this point in my life, if it was a choice, I'd still prefer to be a gay man. I wouldn't want to change. But I think that's the most important thing. I think a lot of Armenians think that somehow queer people just sort of like go the wrong way, in their preteens or teens, or there's like some bad influence or someone abuses them or they watch porn or something. It's like, no, there's nothing you can do to prevent it. And there's nothing wrong with it.
But my message is really to children, because that is my motivation for my life's work, right? Is to support children growing, thriving, their educational journey, their emotional journey from TK all the way to, for Glendale Unified, it's 12th grade, but definitely higher education. My message for children is there is nothing wrong with you. If you think there is something wrong with you, there is nothing wrong with you, right? You will always be able to find an adult, whether it be on campus or in your home, that is safe for you, right? So identify who that is, whether it's an aunt or an uncle. Hopefully it's your own parents, it's your own immediate family. But if you don't have that at home, you will have it somewhere on a public school campus, somewhere on a college campus. You will have an adult that will support you. So if you think that there is something wrong with you, find that adult or email me, president@glendaleteachers.org. And you will have an advocate. You will have a safe adult, because that's what our children need. They need adults around them that support them regardless of their journey to becoming a productive citizen of our community, right? And they need to feel that they are supported in their academic journey, their emotional journey, their maturity levels, right? Because they're growing. I mean, we get them when they're babies and they graduate as adults, almost adults. I thought when I started teaching high school that I went from middle school to high school, that I was going to like the ninth graders most. But honestly, when the seniors walk in with their car keys and their coffee and they get my humor, I absolutely love teaching the seniors. And so our job is to support our children and their journey to becoming happy, healthy citizens of our community. So there's nothing wrong with you, kids. Find that adult that will support your growth and keep growing, keep thriving, keep believing in yourself.
Yeah, I think my message would be to the adults, to the parents. No amount of putting your kids into private schools is going to shield them from the reality. As like a kid who grew up in private schools, we're everywhere. I hate to break it to you. The sooner you come to grips with reality, the sooner you're going to have a happy, healthy family. So just be open-minded.
Yeah, mine is very similar to Sean's. It doesn't say no amount of sort of ignoring your children or conflict with your children is worth it. Like no amount of your value, your like seemingly values or moral kind of high ground is worth the distance that you put between you and your child when you deny them access to their identity and their freedom. And I have a son as well, and we bring children into the world, and I think there's an idea that we're going to mold them and shape them into like the way we want them. But the reality is they come out sort of beautiful, perfect, imperfect. And your job is to just sort of steer them a little this way and steer them a little that way and make sure they don't fall off the cliff. But other than that, it is not, they're going to be themselves one way or another. You can either be part of that and join them on their journey, or you can deny yourself the opportunity to watch a beautiful human being come into the world. And ultimately, there'll be deep regrets if you do that. So better to join them,
I really felt that. Thank you. Is there anything that any of you wanted to talk about that we didn't address? I mean, I'm sure we can't cover absolutely everything, but is there something important that you wanted to say that you felt didn't get addressed?
I mean, I'm just kind of curious, and I don't know if this is just me not living down there, not knowing it's 2026. Has this situation resolved? Do we feel like it's resolved? Do we feel like anyone won? Trump is still in office. We're still going to be dealing with a degree of, I think, permissiveness around bad behavior, or, like non-human rights behavior. But I don't know. Where are we at now in the LUSD with these issues?
Well, in terms of our school board meeting, they're not as present, although every once in a while extremists do show up. I will share that elections are very important. So the last 2 election rounds, including the current school board elections, we have 3 school board seats up, right? And we do have 3 candidates who are supported by extremists, right? Who are very traditional in terms of their way of defining who gets to be acknowledged, right? And so as a union, we are very active in our elections, and we support candidates that are inclusive of diversity of all of our students, that recognize that schools need to be safe spaces for all families. And so it's still occurring, particularly in elections, and our goal is to ensure that our endorsed candidates get elected so that we can continue the work that we do in our classrooms supporting all of our students.
I'll go last.
Yeah, I would say the focus on this discussion has been heavily on public schools and love and support them. But I grew up in going to private schools where it's like siloed off, no GSA, no anything. And what I will say is like I've noticed since 2023, it's not ever really explicitly said out loud, but like Armenian parents pulling their kids from public schools, putting them in private schools. I'm aware of at least one school here in LA that has expanded, built another building or what have you. If you read between the lines, it's like the parents are pulling their kids because God forbid they see gay people, putting them into their like private schools. It is concerning that parents are trying to like bend reality around their kids, but it just says to me we just have more work to do.
My closing thought is this. In a fast-growing world where Armenians are becoming smaller and smaller as a minority, with a nation that's still struggling to come out of what happened in 2020 and after, with diaspora having the challenge of keeping our culture and our history and not assimilating too much, and with our enemies, let's just, make no bones about it, our enemies trying to, not only some of them want us dead, but they're trying to erase our history, with Google Maps changing Armenians' towns, with Armenian history being distorted in Wikipedia. I can go on and on. This is what I do on a daily basis. And can we really afford to have any Armenian disfranchised and to turn away because they feel like they're in hostility? Even if you go by, this antiquated study done in 1977, 10% of the world population is queer on some level. And I think that's way more than that, but let's just say 10. Can we afford to isolate 10% of Armenians when all of us have to be activists at this point, when we're dealing with the unlimited resources of Azerbaijan and Turkey and other nations? This is my message for all Armenians. And the answer is, obviously, we all would agree, no, we cannot, because we're still in danger. Armenia is in danger. Diaspora is in danger, and our future and our history is in danger because they are trying to completely change it. The one that has more money can actually write the history. And that's just been, the usual thing that happens. Just something to think about.
Yeah, I've always said we can't afford to lose any of our people. We don't have that many to start with. So I'm really hoping, and I don't know how it'll happen, but conversations like this will be part of it, where we can help our community to grow and to come into modern times without shame, without losing any of the things that make us special and uniquely Armenian. That's my hope, because the younger generation needs us. And if the community isn't there for them, they will leave. They will leave.
Laura, thank you so much for hosting us. This is
You're
such an
very
important
welcome.
topic, very important conversation, and I'm grateful to my colleagues here.
We've definitely run long, so bear with me for 2 more minutes. I wanted to sort of end it on a lighthearted question, sort of shake off the heaviness and stress that I feel. And so I want to ask each and every one of you to tell us what your favorite Armenian dish is. What is your favorite Armenian food? Some people find this the most difficult question, but I'm sure
This
you
is
guys can
easy.
handle it.
Super easy, because while we were talking, my mom's sent on our group chat a picture of a sini of manti that she just made for my nephew, and I'm super jealous that I'm not going to be able to eat it. So my mother's manti is by far my favorite Armenian dish, and I know that there's some Lebanese influence there too, but I think that's we being diasporan, because Armenians, most of us are, right? Our culinary, it's a mix of like, you find out much later what words were actually not Armenian, but were Turkish, what foods were actually not Armenian but were Lebanese. But yeah, manti, a big old sini of manti.
I'll go
Well,
next.
yeah.
I'll go next. I'm a pescatarian, so it's a little bit harder for me. My mother's upset when I became a pescatarian, because how can I eat shish kebab if I'm a pescatarian? Lent is one of my favorite times because there's a lot of vegetarian meals around, right? So one of my favorites is vospov kofte, so lentil kofte. So I absolutely love it, with the tomato salad that it comes with, and I had that Saturday at my mom's house. My mom made it for me, so that's one of my favorites.
I'm vegan, so if you think being a pescatarian is difficult or radical, try being a vegan. Lenten foods are the only foods that I can eat.
There's an Armenian cookbook that's vegan at Abril bookstore. I bought one, so
I
definitely.
have it.
Wonderful.
I'm a vegetarian and I never have problems with Armenian restaurants. I can always find something to eat. I don't know the origin of ikra. I've heard it might be some Russian. influence, but ikra is my favorite thing. But if you want authentic Armenian with no questions, if we panjarabut soup, just love it. So comforting.
That has lentils in it, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And wheat and veggies and herbs.
I love that soup too on a rainy day.
All right, Shant.
Yeah. I love my meat. Khorovats, call it stereotypical, call it whatever, but like put some meat on a skewer over charcoal. I am very happy.
And you eat it right there.
You've been to Armenia. You've been to Armenia, right?
I have once in 2018.
I was gonna say Khorovats is. I mean, that's the only place to eat
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for joining us. This was a really important discussion to have, and I hope that we can continue to have more like this in our community. If this episode resonated with you, please visit amotche.com where you can find resources and information for all of our panelists. Until next time, thank you all.
Thanks, Lara.
Hacholutyun.
Yeah. Thank
Bye,
you, Lara.
everybody.
Thank you. Bye, y'all.
Thank you for listening to Amot Che. If this episode resonated with you, please visit amotche.com for resources, support, and ways to get involved. Share this episode to help break the stigma and build community. Take care of yourself and each other.